Welcome and thank you for joining us for a special poetry reading in conjunction with the exhibition Diedrick Brackens' Arc of Bulrushes, on view at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art through August 22nd. I'm Lauren O'Connell, Curator of Contemporary Art. This program is a special collaboration between the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art and Emancipation Arts, a Phoenix-based organization that aims to raise the profile of Black artists in Arizona and to honor African and enslaved ancestors through measurably influencing, constructively impacting, and fortifying underserved, at-risk, or neglected populations. The spoken word today will highlight elements of family, love, social justice, and the Black experience from a multi-generational perspective. We bring this talented group of artists and poets to you as a pre-celebration of Juneteenth, a holiday celebrating the emancipation of those who had been enslaved. We hope that programs such as this will inspire our audience to expand their viewpoint and their relationship to others. And now I'm pleased to introduce the four poets reading today. Diedrick Brackens is a Los Angeles-based artist, best known for his weavings that explore narratives about queerness, masculinity, and the Black experience in the United States. Poetry plays a large role in his artistic practice, from inspiration to writing his own. Claudia Hammonds is an artist, writer, poet, activist, educator, and prevention specialist. She is the creative director and founder of Emancipation Arts and creator of the Emancipation Marathon, a literary tradition that honors the victims of American chattel slavery. George Hammons is a Southern California poet. Hammonds is the author of Hungry to Bed, published by Arroyo Seco Press in 2017, and Witness, selected poems published by Picture Show Press in 2020. Sean Avery Medlin is a rapper, poet, organizer, and teaching artist. Their work integrates music, literature, and theater to question the limits of Black masculinity, media, misrepresentation and representation, and personal narrative. Medlin is the author of 808s and Other Worlds, Memories, Remixes, and Mythologies, published by $2 Radio, and is scheduled to be released later this year. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm very excited to hear all of your poetry and watch you read. So we will begin with Diedrick Brackens. George, go ahead and turn off your camera if you will.
Thank you for that introduction, Lauren, and thank you, Clottee, George, and Sean for agreeing to participate. I can't wait to hear your poems. And I'm going to read a poem inspired by real life events in my hometown of Mejia, Texas, and in keeping with the Juneteenth holiday. They have grown gills for Stephen Booker, Carl Baker, and Anthony Freeman. The lake becomes a ghost, and I decide to lay down in its place. For comfort, I polish its bed smooth, quilt a palette of bulrushes and cattails together. Tie it to the corners of the shore. I suffer with the water's departed chores. I have had a lifetime of practice sitting still. I am already a perfect liquid circuit. I am everything wet was except musical. The fish return to me first. I banish the bright, curved ascension of their children and lovers. The catfish, sacred here, multiply in Lake Me. The whiskered faithful sing in a one-word language. Water, womb, God, gather, breathe, brother, hunt, and heartbeat are all the same. Fish prayers are easy to answer. The days pass quiet, so I sleep. Sometimes I dream of boys. They fall and flap, breaking open my glassy eye. They dance down deep into my belly where I can't cry them out. I try and fill their chests with breathe, God, brother. I don't know the words for save or swim. My catfish read them, suits of clouds. What kind of powerless God did this make me? Um, and so now we will hear a poem from Claudia Hammonds. Thank you.
Thank you, Diedrick. I can't breathe. I'm trying to give my mind a break by taking time to meditate, but I can't breathe. My pounding heartbeat was bequeathed to me from a terrified runaway struggling to breathe. An accusation, a noose, a jury, a gun, or a knee are the weapons they use, so I can't breathe. Self-control only means not disturbing the peace of those that can freely breathe. And George, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'm going to read a poem called Romeo and Donna. And the only thing that you need to know about this poem is that all of the characters are Black. Somewhere down in the Mississippi town, Romeo Jones pranced. Somewhere around that same little town, Donna Phillips danced. They met one steamy Friday night in a club that had no name. It was a little old place where folks could dance. The kids nicknamed it Shame, Shame, Shame. Now the two fell headlong into love as they danced the night away. The two romanced, and before they knew it, it was the break of day. Young Romeo saw fair Donna home. They was walking hand in hand. When they came across her daddy, oh, he was mad to beat the band. He seen that Jones boy black as tar with hair all kinked and nappy. And he said, I knows his type's no good, girl. Trust me, I's your pappy. Next, her daddy run young Romeo off because he was so Black. Then he took away Donna's dancing shoes and he would not give them back. But Donna loved her Romeo and she saw him every day. Them two young kids couldn't give a hoot about what some old folks say. Still, her daddy couldn't let it be, so he followed her one night. He found them by the river, and it was there he picked a fight. At first, it was quite funny.
Okay, so we seem to have some technical difficulty. So, Sean, I'd love to invite you to the stage.
Hi everyone, I'm very thankful to be here. Clottee Hammonds is a really incredible historian and poet who I learn a lot from, um, as well as George. So I just feel very honored to be here. I'll be reading from my book, 808s and Other Worlds, which is set to release in the fall. I wanted to show it to you all. This is the first prints, so these are not for sale, but I do have these copies, and it's really great to be able to hold what I created. I'm going to read a poem today called Record of Black Folk in Arizona, which is actually heavily inspired by Clottee Hammonds' Indiscernibles in Arizona exhibit. 02/14/1912. More than 70 years after the Trail of Tears, I heard the first black woman out here was a slave of the Cherokee Nation, pushed out by Jackson. Heard she walked with her children back in 1868, dragged over the land we now call the USA. When she got here, she continued to serve. I have no more words. 02/14/1912. 1 century after, cotton fields still blooming quietly far west of the valley. We pass white plants and grandma goes by. Her hands can't unstick sharp, prickly points formed in summer harvest. The boils like a wetland cactus. Blood-stained labor built capital. Phoenix, a state-born poster board that protects Confederates. 09/22/1913. 2nd Street, Colored School, renamed Dunbar. Black folks are never called refugees, but we were stolen and thrown in these deserts. We sing blues through global anti-blackness. We wear the mask, forever spread across nations. I hold to task every Southwest historian. You're half-assing if you don't post our stories up. 02/14/1912. Black folk re-surviving, worlds ending and ending. 02/14/1912. Undocumented centuries of working in fields. 09/22/1913. 2nd Street, Colored School, renamed Dunbar. I hold to task every Southwest historian. You're half-assing if you don't post black stories up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful poems. I'd love to invite you all back to the screen to have a conversation about what you read, and also, if it so inspires you, to share more. And George, if you want to come back too, if your computer is working, and feel free to continue to share your poem as well. George, do you want to finish your poem?
Yeah, I don't. How far did I get?
He picked a fight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my computer turned off. I'm sorry. Just share it from that point.
Whatever feels.
Okay. Okay. I'll just share it from that point. Okay, I'll pick it up from still her daddy couldn't let it be, so he followed her one night. He found them by the river, and it was there he picked a fight. At first, it was quite funny. The old man was swinging wild, and young Romeo was just a dancing, as agile as a child. Then her daddy seemed to tire, and he turned as if to walk away, but he wheeled around with a pocket knife and stole Romeo's life away. Fair Donna was terror-stricken. She slipped and tumbled in the drink. That poor girl couldn't swim a lick. Her daddy watched her sink. Oh, he dived in trying to save her. But when he got her to the shore, she lay there next to Romeo. She would laugh and dance no more. Oh, her daddy hadn't meant to kill that little black-skinned boy. He'd only meant to run him away. Fair Donna was his pride, his joy. And now the two young lovers lie in the graveyard side by side, as if to spite the old man with his foolish, light-skinned pride. Oh, somewhere down in a Mississippi town, the kids said, shame, shame, shame. But they were talking about a tragedy and a funeral in the rain. Somewhere around that same little town, an old man cried alone as he mourned his darling Donna and her true love, Romeo Jones. That's it.
Thank you so much, George.
Okay.
Well, I would So I would love to open it up for conversations amongst yourself. Maybe any responses you have, whether it's other works that you feel connect to each other. But I do want to say that it seems like a lot of the works today talked about bodies of water. They talked about breath um, in different forms, the connection to life and hidden stories and hidden paths. So I feel like it would be lovely to maybe kind of dissect how that all connects as well. But um, Sean, you mentioned Clottee's Indiscernibles exhibition. Um, Maybe you and Clottee could share a little bit more about what that was and the information in it. And then Diedrick, the story from Mahia, Texas, the Juneteenth story, a lot of people are familiar with it because of the work Drowned Jubilee that you've done, but maybe also you could share a little bit about that story and how it's influenced your work. Um, and George, I know you write a lot from personal experience, so maybe if you would love to share a little bit about, um, you know, the story behind your poem and or the kind of like meanings there. So I turn it over to all of you.
Well, I just want to say while I have everyone on the line here, um, the Indiscernibles in Arizona exhibit was really formative to the completion of my collection. Um, Before that, I had not seen really any Black Phoenician like put together a cohesive timeline of, you know, what we might call like major events or important events um, relating to like the Black diaspora and their travel and homemaking in Arizona. Um, and one of the poems in that exhibit, I believe it is George's poem, um, was really incredible for me to read at the time. This was probably about maybe 2 years ago, maybe a little bit more. But at the time, it was very important because I had not read like Black poets writing about Phoenix using rhythm and rhyme. Um, and, you know, that's very much where I feel at home in poetry. So it was really, really inspiring and affirming, I think is the word, right? Like, okay, like I'm not alone. I haven't been alone um, in terms of the way that I want to express myself as a Black artist here. And I was able to, like, you know, just learn. Like a lot of things in the poem Record of Black Folk in Arizona are things that I learned from the exhibit and then continued to, you know, do some research on my own about. Um, so yeah, I just want to say that while I had both, you know, both Hammonds here virtually on the line. And I would, you know, I would love for either Clottee or George too to talk a little bit more about like that exhibit and like what it means to them and their intentionality around it.
Sean, thank you so much. It's been a struggle to get that out into the world. A lot of doors closed in my face, but I felt that it needed to be done. And it's the Great Migration is always about Harlem or Detroit or some other place. And so many Black people moved throughout the Southwest as refugees because some of the most heinous lynchings and acts of violence occurred where these people came from. And so I could not get over that, and no one was willing to talk about it, and except having Black people in the desert as tangents to other stories. And so I've worked at it for a while, and it's very gratifying to hear you say that. And a lot of my work has to do with, excuse me, historical facets of Black life, but the trajectory onto today. And I do have something that I would like to read to you that eventually will be a graphic novel. This character will be a graphic novel. So if I may read that to you right now, it's called Property. Come on here, gal, and do as I say. I don't need no kind of reason to sell you away. You ain't smart, you ain't pretty, but you near about right. I'ma have what I want. I bought you. You're mine. He scraped her neck and chin to blood with his beard while crushing her breath away with his weight. Because she was a child, it was not her place to ask why she was punished that way. Her little girl's mind struggled to give a name to the pain. It wasn't a beating, a burn, or a cut, but all the same, there was blood. Just a word so it would make some sense. Because it was always her fault, she prayed to be good and to know how to never commit the unknown offense again. Through years of ambushes and grunting assaults, the girl came to realize that nothing was her fault. She got taller, he got fatter. She got stronger, he was predictable. Better not try and fight me, gal. You know what the good books say. I'm your master. That means you have to obey. So is we gonna get married? She asked nonchalantly. Married? What you talking about, fool? God told me I'm gonna be a wife. You keep God's name out your heathen mouth. As she foresaw, he swung to hit her, lunging into the knife. He lay in disbelief, too weak to holler. Walking into a new future, she kept hold of that knife.
Wow.
And I'm going to turn it over to somebody else.
Wow. I would say that, I mean, that's incredibly powerful. And I think that it was interesting when Lauren was commenting on the water that's kind of evident in, a lot of our poetry. And, it always makes me think of how important rivers are in Black culture, whether you go back to the Moses in the basket or, all of these different things. But water is something that culturally, whether it be crossing over to freedom or whether it be, a baptism of some sort, I just think that, that imagery is something that is inherent to our way of thinking about freedom. And that was it. I just had a quick comment to say that I think that that was something that I really believe does kind of create this connectedness with so many of us, is that idea of water being somehow equated to our journey and our freedom. So.
And then what you say, George, too, like the water in the ways that it's talked about is a form of birth and rebirth and also death. So it's kind of, in all of the ways that you've talked about it, it's the cycle of life and loss and gain, but also a sense of gaining too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking a lot about those things too when folks were reading about the water, and I feel like I have this conversation with Black folks all the time about what their relationship is to water. And I think for me, this thing that comes up a lot, or that I pay attention to, stories that move me always, or these stories of drowning, specifically of Black folks drowning. And I think so much about like what it means to be able to swim and to stay alive in water, and historically how like Black folks have been separated from, I mean, leisure, but specifically the idea, the sport of swim. And for me, the poem that I read was about an incident in 1981 where 3 Black men were drowned in police custody in the Lake Mejia in my hometown, um, at a Juneteenth celebration. And so for me, there's like all of these ways that I think about what it means for this to happen, sort of at the heart of Juneteenth in Texas, on this land owned by Black folks, and what that did to that celebration in that space over the intervening like 40 years. And I guess in the poem, it was important to me to think about how to retell this story without having to, in writing in these Black boys' lives again and again and again. And so I think using these catfish and thinking about the lake as an entity were ways that I wanted to kind of transform that story and be able to share it in a way that felt like hopefully like in the retelling maybe something else could happen, or there was a different kind of relationship to this horror. um yeah.
So you talk about also catfish to Diedrick, and it seems so much the catfish is almost like a mythological god. Like it, you talk about they live for so long, and somehow these boys were like became catfish, and the kind of like way that they live on through these almost spirit animals in the water, but also with such ties to the South and food culture and so many other things. So
Yeah, I mean, I think about for me, it seems like a closed loop of like um, eating this thing, sort of this final resting place being this pond, um, that sort of um, we eat, we consume them, they consume these decomposing things, thinking about sort of kind of trying to have a triangulation, I guess, of things between the catfish, eating the catfish. Um, yeah, especially in its southernness, it is like in everyone's um, home, I guess, in a way, both in the landscape and the food. They are mascots. You see catfish sort of permeating like all facets of life.
so and the fish breathes water. So again, back to breath. Clottee, I would love to hear a little bit more about your first reading. I think in listening to it, to me at least, it was very obvious that it's in response to George Floyd's murder. But maybe you could speak a little bit about how you use poetry to express. I mean, clearly it was also about your own anger and frustration with the situation, if you feel comfortable talking about that.
Okay. There is and has been a tide, if you will, of white people that are sort of looking to Black people to give them direction on how to be more fair and more reactive and probably do the things they knew they should have been doing all along. And it can be exhausting and it can be frustrating because you feel like you're saying the same thing over and over and over again. And poetry and art in general, visual art as well, has been frequently a response mechanism for me. So instead of, going and screaming or throwing myself in traffic or something, I write something. I create a picture or something of that sort. And that's what that response was at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, George, I actually want to turn a question over to you. Your writing, at least the one that we heard today, was very much about love or unrequited love. And the kind of almost, you mentioned at the very beginning that all of the characters in your poem were Black, but there was clearly a level of racism within that. But I actually want to talk more about that element of love in your work, so and family and connectedness. So maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yes. In terms of Romeo and Donna, it really came from a conversation I had with a very black-skinned, African American guy, and he had grown up, and he said that in the area he grew up, they had these parties where if you were dark-skinned, you could not enter, and that was kind of like the genesis of that poem, and then the idea of Romeo and Juliet would just lend itself to that. It is something that, we have to be careful of how we treat each other as African people. And, it is something that has existed. I mean, and again, we're not, pure anything, but at the same time, that type of a wedge has been used or has developed amongst our own people. And I think that that's a way, the poem is just a way for me to think about that and to ask others to think about how we treat each other based on purely physical characteristics. And so, basically that's where that came from. And I think that, people say, well, what do you write about? And I used to take that kind of like, what do you mean, what do I write about? What does anybody write about? But the thing is, I write about social justice, I write about family, and I write about love. Because I write about romantic love because I think that so often it's considered immature or not worthy, but it is. We spend all these hours of the day, kind of thinking about that. And so, it was interesting. When I get a chance, I would like to read the poem that Sean was mentioning, because it is, something that I really consider to be important. And it talks about my grandmother who raised both, Clottee and myself. And I think that sometimes like she was like the type of person, she never said, oh, I love you, son, like, Joe Biden talk about, oh, honey, this and that. She wasn't that type of person. But she was very influential, and she is somebody who kind of made me realize that love isn't always necessarily expressed, vocally. But I do try to do that in my poems. So.
Yeah, please read it.
Oh, okay. And it's a poem, and it is part of the exhibit, the indiscernibles, I'm sorry, my mind, it slipped my mind. Okay, I'm going to read the poem. It's downtown Phoenix, 1959. This is not one poem. It is a part of every poem that I have ever known. It's a long walk in the hot sun. It's concrete and heat. It is my tennis shoes melting on my feet. This is a trip downtown with all of the old storefronts and the sights and sounds. It's Indians in front of F.W. Woolworth's Five and Dime. It's Indians sitting on homemade blankets with silver and turquoise jewelry, moccasins and artifacts, mysterious, curious things for sale. It's Indians sitting patiently, not talking, not laughing, not even sweating, otherworldly. It's like they're not really here, but here they are. And I, a child, don't understand their pain. I don't recognize the shame in selling artifacts. You see, I want to know what it is that TV's Cowboys and Indians hasn't told. I want to show that I love their bright colored clothes. I want to be their friend, but they never look at me. Somewhere here too are sunburnt prophets, shouting on the street corners, hollering about hell, sweating and hollering, scaring me with their insane accusations about sins. And I, a child, don't even know what sins are, but they always seem to look right at me and holler in a tone that's like a muffled horn. I think that their voices are hollow, not hallowed. I think that they are evil. I think that they are sins. I think that they are devils, mad about hell. I think that they want hell to come just so that they can say, I told you so. This is what I know about the heat and the concrete and the melting shoes on my feet. This is what I know about Indians and street corner prophets. Also, this poem says that I know that when you are Black and downtown and it is 1959, you don't take any chances or anger anyone. You are humble to the point of ignorance. You stand and wait silently until the salesman is ready to wait on you, until they are ready to take your money. And you know that they ignored you just to show their scorn for you. And you accept it and give them your money and go on silently. At home, you might say, oh, I almost told them. But the fact is you didn't. And I, a child, not used to not saying what I think, want to make them notice me. But my grandmother says they might kill us if I talk. So I, a child, not exactly sure what killed would be, try to say nothing. The heat, the Indians sitting patiently, otherworldly, the sunburnt prophets shouting and sweating, praying for hell to come, my shoes melting on my feet, my grandmother's sidelong glance when I say, but Mama, we was next. The hateful stare of the salesman, the reassuring grip of my grandma's hand, and the silence that saves us are all here, a part of me never to be forgot, a part of me still hot about downtown Phoenix in 1959.
I remember reading that in Clottee's exhibition as well, and it gives such a beautiful, a tragically beautiful point of view from being a child at that time. Sean, do you want to talk about, was there anything in particular about that poem? I noticed he used the word otherworldly, and the title of your new book is 808s and Other Worlds. Do you want to talk about that, or is there?
Yeah, I can talk. I actually did have a poem that I wanted to share as well, if that's okay, if we have time. Um, yeah, it's really, I mean, it's a coincidence that the poem uses otherworldly and that I use that as my title. But also probably not. I think that like to be Black in Arizona is another worldly experience. When we think about like the dominant narrative of Blackness across the North America for sure, um, the South and the North, and then the Midwest, and then the West Coast story, and there's not a story for this corner. And so you don't see yourself reflected anywhere, so it doesn't necessarily feel like it belongs in our world, right? And yeah, I think that we both maybe just arrived to that truth of the experience. I also talk a lot about like being a child here, right? And George's poem is talking about being a child too, and I think that also adds to this quality of otherworldly or surreal or surreality maybe. Um, but the poem that I did want to read is a speculative sort of exploration. One thing that Record of Black Folk in Arizona, what it doesn't do, what so much of my other work does, is that it uses speculative fiction to explore so many things, whether that's, Black rage or like a concept of reparations or, thinking of like a new Black, I don't want to use the word nation because nations are kind of trash, but you know what I mean? Like a new Black world, whatever that might be. So this piece, I thought about it when everyone was talking about water. Um, this is a piece from the point of view of Storm, the X-Men character. Um, and as soon as I have it, I will read it. Just gotta reorganize my screen here. Okay, so it's called Hurricane, or Storm Gives a Lecture on the Middle Passage. Mutant comes from the Latin word mutare, meaning to change. In this way, all living things are mutants. Seeds change into infants, infants change into adults, adults change into compost. What makes superhuman mutants different is that we are aware we are mutants. Therefore, we change much more than ourselves. My birth name is Aurora Monroe. Perhaps in another timeline, my hero name was Rain Daughter, or Flower Mother, maybe Water Bearer or Desert Savior. But in this timeline, my mutation changed into something destructive by definition, a natural act of cleansing and chaos. I wonder if this sort of genetic alchemy has a trigger. Perhaps some Africans lost in the ocean were mutants, and upon descending the depths, they mutated into something not mutant or human. Perhaps having been from my birth coast, their initial powers were weather phenomena. Maybe just a few of them, or maybe most of them. These West African mutants could be the eyes fixing wind and water on dry lands and cities, mournful ghosts, spinning storm after storm like spin tops, crashing into whatever unsunken earth lies ahead. Phantoms singing ancestral pain like sea gods seething thunderous waves. Perhaps these freedom-seeking folks even adapted to their water world, becoming like Namor and the Atlanteans, but dark as cooled lava in the crowns of orca whales. Who's to say these Mer Africans don't live deeper than Atlantis or military submarine, deeper than any human, mutant, or cosmic deity can descend? Imagine living on our blue planet, yet dozens of miles below emperors and borders, completely free from tyrannies that rot even superhumans right here on the surface. Thank you.
Wow, I have to say, I didn't think a poem about mutants and superheroes would bring me to like almost tears. That was really gorgeous. Thank you, Sean. I'd love to actually also talk a little bit about, so in looking at both your George and your writing, George pulled Romeo and Juliet from the classic Shakespeare story, and your kind of fiction that you pulled from what was the X-Men. So talking also about these influences of different generations. And of course, we all study Shakespeare, but just the kind of like ways in which we, like what we pull from in terms of culture to tell our stories. Or so to me, there's something really interesting here in terms of the kind of multi-generational aspect. I also think that, after hearing George's poem about 1959, and Shawnee, you saying that you write about your childhood, it would be really interesting to hear something about, like, from your perspective of childhood, because they took place at really different times, but both in Phoenix, and both from similar perspectives in some ways. So, and you don't have to read that right now, but I'm feeling like maybe we need to get you guys together to do like readings about your childhood or something.
George, I loved how your poem felt like surreal in a way that it always came back to the same place, concrete on the feet. Like it was like running headlong towards something, and then it just was like back at the same door, or climbing stairs, but never getting to the top ness of it all. And then I think Sean, by like contrast, like this, going deeper and deeper, but getting like such a richer and richer world, like offering this potential new place to be, or like old place to go to. And I feel like so often I think about this middle passage experience in that similar way, like what happened to those people, what could have been, what place can you dream from. So it's like hearing the thing that I've never written, that I'm like, yes, I think about this every day. It's beautiful.
Anybody who ever had to walk in downtown Phoenix on a 110-degree day, knows. And we used to walk everywhere. So I can remember standing, waiting to go into a movie. I believe it was The Strand. And they had these, like in the concrete, there was like these little things that looked like glass, almost like little square tiles. And you would feel like your shoes were going to melt. And you could touch them, they'd be pliable. So no, that is, that's true. And it's like right now, we're in California. So we're sweating it out. It's like 88 degrees, So I don't mean to rub it in, but it's just like, if you haven't experienced, I'm sure in Texas, though, you probably had something similar.
It's not quite the same. There's something about the few times I've been in Arizona or anywhere in the Southwest, I'm like, it's dry. And I think you're like dried out before you realize it's hot, because in Texas, it's like humid, and you're like out there, it's swampy, you're used to the kind of slow moving. But I feel like anytime I've been in the desert and it's over 100 degrees, I'm like, oh, I've got to get inside. But I love hearing the Southwest Black experience. It's like new to me.
Lauren, I do have a downtown poem that incorporates childhood, if I might read it for you.
Please, you're more than welcome. I would love that.
This is called My Own Little Ghost. We walked to Mass every day before class, like good little Catholic children. The nuns were strict and taught with a stick the ways of a loving Creator. At recess time, we stood on line, parading onto the playground. Once on the blacktop, our lessons were not the kind tested, graded, and much later divinely rewarded. Sticky and hot, my Oxfords raced at speed intended to blur the faces chanting nigger, nigger, nigger to the sway of the Angelus bells. Now when I pass that playground, still on the corner downtown, I see the streak of my own little ghost.
Wow. Definitely. George, I'll let you jump in. I just was going to say it's so poignant to hear the childhood perspective, especially of Phoenix.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it was interesting that Clottee and I, we attended a Catholic school during a time which I say that our teachers were trying to figure out exactly what we were, almost as if like some subspecies had come to them. It was like being treated almost as if you weren't. Like I said, I used to say that the Catholics were kind of like, their God was so good that even niggers could get to heaven if they knew how to act. And so it was an experience that definitely, on one hand, you're a child, so you want to believe what the other children around you believe, but then you're being treated differently. So you're like, well, what kind of God would do this? What kind of God would allow this? And the idea that you're comprehending and figuring things out at the same level as everybody around you never occurred to them. That we are as observant, we are as conscious, we are as up to date as the kids sitting next to us. And it's only in the teacher's mind and in those kids' minds that we weren't. So I think that I get a lot of that out of Clottee's writing. So it's just like and Clottee was always much smarter than I am. So it's just like I took a lot of cues from her. I learned a lot from her. And so it's just like, I think that that's what the real harm is in many ways, is that you're dealing with somebody who, you're no smarter than they are. The person, being discriminatory to you is no smarter than you intellectually, and culturally, they're actually not as smart as you, because, we're sitting up watching, Star Trek and, like all of these things. We feel like we're part of this culture. This is our culture. But you have somebody else who's kind of like, oh, well, not really, so I just wanted to throw that in. So that's kind of like a lot of what I got, from Clottee.
And if I might say, as well as the mother of a Black son, the grandmother of a Black young man, and I'm here with Black men, they are singled out differently. And so as an observer of that, and hearing their reflections, it really, I feel like I absorb it all, because, when they're ridiculed, it hurts me. And ridicule was a very ever-present factor in being a Black child in the Phoenix area. I mean, it was always there. It didn't matter how well you try to dress, how well you behaved. None of those things mattered, because on any given day, you were the object of someone's ridicule, someone's aggressiveness, someone's, and it certainly didn't help that so many of our classmates were the offspring of John Birch Society members. So you really had no clue into their motive about why they behaved the way they did, except for the color of your skin. That was it.
If I might, I have another poem that I would like to read. I feel like it's appropriate right now. Lauren?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. Um, it's a poem. It's called I Was on TV Once When I Was a Kid. I was an altar boy from St. Mary's Catholic School, and I got picked to do Mass on the local TV station. I don't remember any of the details, how I got to the TV station, who I met there, which priest did the Mass, what day of the week the thing was recorded on. I know that it wasn't live because on the Sunday morning that they televised it, my grandmother was in the living room sipping coffee and reading her Sunday newspaper in front of our old black and white TV, which I made sure to tune to the channel which the Mass was on. I didn't say anything because I figured she'd look up and see me. I thought that she'd see the dark figure decked out in the cool cassock and ask, "Who dat?" And I would let her know that it was me. And I'd tell her the whole story and we'd laugh. I hovered around, and every time they had a close up of me, I'd make some noise. But she kept sipping coffee and gazing at her newspaper all the way through the broadcast. And I had been so proud of my bell ringing, it was clean and crisp. Any former altar boy will know what I'm talking about. At the end of the broadcast, they showed a view of the altar and credits rolled as a voice announced the priest's name and then said something to the effect that the altar boy was, and then they said my name. My grandmother tilted her head up and asked, "What did they just say?" But I was so angry, I told her I wasn't listening.
I actually am curious to hear from Diedrick and Sean, and hearing about George and Clottee's experience of childhood, um, as a different generation, how you, like, any responses you have to that or how it affects you.
I feel like so many of like my own family stories from childhood I don't know, and I think some of it is about like some of the horror and pain that they experienced. So it's always interesting to me to hear folks reflect on these histories that I don't have access to, like familially, I suppose. And I think the very few stories I have, like I reflect on them now about like from my father or my grandparents. I'm like, oh, that's horrible. I don't know how I would have made it. And so I think that there's something about that I hear sort of echoing in both Clottee and George's work that um, they're like the sing-songness of the rhyme almost sometimes like makes you forget, but then like when you hear some of the words, I feel like the rage is so palpable under even like that the spell of rhyme that for a second you're like, oh, this sounds so beautiful, and then you're like, how do I not scream? Like you can hear in the writing that there is this sort of like making sense of the like traumatic and violent, and like getting people hooked and listening to for the rhyme, um, and then you're like, oh, I can't escape. Um, and I think I don't know what it is. I think sometimes though it is that the ways that things that have happened um, before my time still ring true to my own experiences. Like those moments, I'm like, damn. Like those through lines, I think, are always uh, as terrible as they are. There's something comforting about being able to relate to someone across time, or that someone might possess answers, or not even answers, but like uh, be able to guide you towards what life is like and could look like, or like what possibilities there are to part from particular parts of those um, traumas. And I think it even maybe talks to like the young me, where I'm like, okay, like this person went through this thing decades before me and is still here and resilient. Like I can like take that somehow and use it.
Um, it it was very emotional for me to hear Clottee's last poem. Um, I had to really hold it together. Because my experience is the same. Um, I recall multiple times in my life being yelled at by a passing car, um, by a classmate. It was a lot. It was a lot because specifically the image of seeing your own little ghost. I think I'm getting the wrong line, but I think I'm getting the line wrong, but something to that effect, and that's so real for me. I go to certain parts of uh, the valley where I grew up, and I see, I remember, and yeah, it's hard. I don't know if I could talk too much more about it, but I did want to speak to something that was brought up not that long ago about me and George's poems, and George referencing Romeo and Juliet, and me borrowing from Storm. Um, and like, all of us here, I think we understand like the very deep Black tradition of reinvention. Um, you know, Everything that I do for sure comes from like a hip hop sensibility. So, you know, if people could take record players and create new music, then or if rappers, I think about like Wu Tang Clan, who's like like legendary now, right? But like these were like men who were selling drugs and like reading comic books, and then that's what they rapped about, and they reinvented these comic book heroes, right? To the point where like if you hear Tony Stark, depending on who you are, you might think of the rapper Ghostface Killer, right? Um, or if you might hear Doctor Doom, you might think of the rapper MF Doom. And so I just pull a lot from that tradition, um, because it's what I grew up in, and it makes the most sense to me. And I saw the way that they were able to like reimagine their whole world, their whole lives through that lens of these personas and these characters. So I was like, why not do it in a book of poems too?
Yeah, I find speculative fiction and futurism to be an extremely powerful form of expressing uh, one's own kind of experiences, but also having the freedom to reinvent, new spaces or new narratives. So I think that's also why your poem about Storm was so powerful. Just discussing the what if, but also not even what if, like maybe like it is real, um, and believing that and living that. Um, I find that really powerful. So yeah, and Sean, I would love to know, if you want to talk more about um, your music, and one of the other readings I watched of yours was it felt like you were rapping your poem, and I think it was the one where you wrote your own words and then you recited Tupac's words as well. Um, so I just find that so So like kind of interesting to think about how you incorporate that part of culture into your own poetry.
Yeah, I think I can talk a little bit about my music. For me, I think I never really thought of poetry and specifically rap music as two different things. Um, my favorite poets, at least growing up, now it's a little different, but growing up they were all rappers. So, you know, it was Lauryn Hill, and it was Mos Def, and Black Thought from the Roots, or, you know, like these were the people who, to me, were like speaking a language that I understood about things that I understood or was interested in, and doing it in like the most exciting way possible, like the most interesting way. Um, and so yeah, I definitely followed that tradition of poetry, still do. And I think, you know, I'm very young. I'm 28, but throughout my life, I think certain institutions have tried to separate these two things, rap and poetry, as far away as possible. I think about like the music industry and like what sort of music gets propagated, right? It's like the least poetic rap music most times. And then I think about um, the world of poetry and, you know, the elitism of academia and the anti-blackness of that, and how, you know, you we don't usually see a poet like me or George or Clottee who's going to use rhyme often, right? You don't usually see that poet in the academic space. Um, and so there is a real, like, tension, I think, between, like, the Black American tradition of poetry and then, like, whatever America thinks it's constructing off of our backs. Um, and I think my goal as an artist is to just always like occupy this space where if you're going to read or listen to my work, you're going to experience it musically just as much as you're going to experience it, I don't know, textually or something, right? And that's just kind of what I believe, you know, what I believe poetry to be. And I also don't want to exclude folks that want poetry to stay on the page, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that like multiplicity should be celebrated, right? And like honored and lifted, but instead like, you know, we trying to push everything far away from each other.
Well, one of the things that Sean hit on that I was thinking about is that, um, and also Diedrick hit on it. I rhyme intentionally. I don't write everything I write doesn't rhyme, but I do it intentionally because of the academic programs that I went through frowned on it, and it was like you couldn't be taken seriously because it's got a rhyme to it. And to me, um, that is something I would say, I'm not writing poetry for poets, I'm writing it for people. And if it makes it easier for someone to engage into it and then they can hear the story that I'm telling, then that's the best thing in the world to me, to have a person who says, I don't like poetry, but I like what you do. And to introduce people, especially young people, to the idea that pick how you want to tell your story, but tell your story through whatever medium. And I think it was really important when Sean was saying that he kind of understood the mechanics of rappers who were talking to him, and it is poetry, So I think that I like when I was a kid, I worked at a pharmacy, and every Saturday we listened to opera. And so I could get into all of these other types of art you know, and I just think that, people who really, some people are looking at poetry like they're scientists. They're trying to, invent something, like the way the word lays on the page, or like, something that's really kind of disjointed, and they want to kind of make it work like in your psyche or something. And, like for me, I'm very much about telling stories. And so I think that, it works for me to rhyme, because a lot of times the real audience that I'm seeking, they're not necessarily looking for a challenge. They're not looking for science on the page.
I just want to say, George, I think I'm starting to get to know you better. I'm feeling like you might be a poetry anarchist by making rhyming poems about romantic love. I mean, it's just it's actually really great. I love your perspective and your position on it. It's fantastic. And it's true, people love things that rhyme, and people do want to hear about romantic love. And if that's your truth and like what you're going for, you got to do it. Well, I'd love to just thank you all so much. I am beyond grateful to be with you today, to hear your voices and hear your stories and hear your perspectives. It's been a real honor, and I look forward to reading more of your work and following all of your work in the future. So thank you guys so very much.
And Lauren, if I could just thank you for bringing us together. And I individually admire each of these young men. I include you too, George, in that young part. But I admire them. And I feel that now you've helped a relationship, because you guys aren't getting away from me. Okay, you guys are gonna be stuck with me. Okay, so I feel, and Scottsdale was a sundown town, and to have us Black folk be able to be a presence, an artistic presence in Scottsdale is almost unheard of. And if just one more thing I would like to give to these young men, because I know when you feed fellas, okay, that goes straight to their heart. And I wrote this for my dear friend Rashad Thomas. He asked me to write an affirmation. And this is my soul food affirmation. And I know each of you guys got something you like to eat a certain way. Nobody fixes it the right way. Okay, so this is my soul food affirmation I'm offering all of you. I believe in the power of pot liquor to feed beyond the belly. I believe in the medley of mustard greens, collard greens, and garlic. I believe love runs from the cutting board, stirred in a pot and spooned into the heart. I believe cultural inheritance is contained in kitchen cabinets.
Lovely, lovely, Clottee. I just adore you. And I know you were talking to those three young men there, but I think you can't get rid of me either. So thank you so much for all that you bring to the Phoenix area, the education, the culture, the enlightenment. Diedrick, thank you for allowing us to show your beautiful artwork here at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art. It's up until August 22nd, and it's just so amazing to have you as a friend and to work with you. And Sean, I'm just like so inspired by your words, and I really hope that we can have you come speak in the museum once we're open and in person again. And George, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I just think that your poetry is wonderful, and I'm so glad. I know that if you guys all haven't realized it, George and Clottee are brother and sister. And so I'm so glad that we were connected through Clottee, and to have your beautiful perspective. So I wish you all the best, and happy Juneteenth and happy summer.